Hi guys, Amy here. We're going to have a look today at the French Leaving Cert. So basically what makes up the French exam, how are you going to be marked, and I suppose we'll go in a little bit of detail of how to kind of spend time and decide what to spend your time on when you're looking at studying French. I'll have kind of a chat at the end to you about changes that we might see to the 2022 paper as well, because they've kind of confirmed that there will be adjustments made based on the first kind of set of adjustments I made. So that's kind of what we'll aim with, but remember, pinch of salt for everything to do with that, because it is kind of subject to change based on what we see over the next year. So first of all, French is marked on 4 competencies of language. Okay, so you've got speaking, reading, writing and listening. They're the 4 things that you're being tested on when you take a French exam. And the very first thing that you'll see is your oral exam. We know that takes place around Easter, so either kind of the 2 weeks before the Easter holidays or the 2 weeks after. Because remember, you have either Irish then French or French then Irish, depending on where you are in the country. The oral exam is worth 100 marks. Okay, so overall French is worth 400 marks. So I should have started with that probably for higher level, 400 marks. 100 of those marks go for your oral, so that's 25%. Okay, so you should be spending about a quarter of your time when you're studying working on the oral. Coming up to the oral exam itself, you probably spend a bit more time just to kind of be really ready, but in general, a quarter of your time studying should go for the oral. Now, it's an exam that is kind of, I suppose, we aim for kind of 12 minutes, but it can fall anywhere between 9 and 12 minutes. So on average, you're looking at about a 10-minute exam, which means that by the time you get to the oral, you need to have 10 minutes of content. So if you're looking for kind of what should I be aiming for, aim for that. If you were to read everything you had prepared for the oral, that you would be hitting, I would say 8 or 9 minutes, because then that leaves a minute of kind of the examiner would be asking you questions in that time. So a quarter of your time studying should be on the oral, and you should be aiming for kind of about 10 minutes of content. Okay, obviously after that then in June we have our written paper. Okay, the written paper altogether is worth 220 marks, which is 55% of your overall exam, which means that about half of the time that you spend studying should be spent on studying the components that come up within the written paper. So traditionally speaking, you have 2 reading comprehensions. One of them is a journalistic text. That means it comes from a newspaper or a magazine. And the second is a literary text, which means it's taken from a novel. It's an extract from a book, okay? I suppose the difference between them then is that it's testing you on different styles of writing. So for the literary text, you'll see things like the passé simple, which is one of our tenses. And it's just making sure that you can kind of recognize different styles of French. Now there's 2 of them. They're worth 60 marks each. Okay, so standalone, it's the biggest component of your exam. So 60 marks times 2, it's 120 marks, which is 30% of your paper. Now, for each of these, you should be spending, say, 35 to 40 minutes. Okay, times 2, because there's 2 exams. So on the day, your exam is 2.5 hours long. About kind of 75-80 minutes of that 2.5 hours you're spending on reading comprehensions. Now, I'm not going to sit down and chat to you today about like, oh, obviously you open the paper, you read the questions. The common sense first of all, and we're just looking at what's going to be there. After that, we have our written section. So on its own, the written section is worth 25%, a quarter of your entire grade, which means that when you're studying, you only need to spend about a quarter of the time on kind of practicing essays. Now, you can bulk that up a small bit if you want to help with grammar and, you know, practicing tenses and things like that, because that will help every other area. But in general, you should only be spending about a quarter of your time practicing essays and diary entries and things like that, because it's only worth a quarter of the marks. So you have question 1, that's obligatory. You must do question 1, A or B, okay? And it's related to the themes that come up in the comprehension. So once you open, if you see a comprehension on, I don't know, food waste, you know you're getting a question on food waste. If you see a comprehension on homelessness, you know you're getting a question 1 on homelessness. It's 90 words, okay? I'll just come down here, 90 words, worth 40 marks, so it's 10% of your overall paper. You should be spending, I would say about 25, but you can kind of bulk it up to 30 minutes. So when you're studying, practice, can I get this question 1 written in 25 to 30 minutes? Okay, so one of those, 40 marks, 10%. After that, you have 3 more questions to choose from. Each has an A or a B. You can only answer 1 from each question, if that makes sense. So if I do 2A, I cannot do 2B. If I do 3A, I can't do 3B, and vice versa, obviously. If I choose 4A, I cannot do 4B. We have kind of predetermined questions, so we know that this one here, generally speaking, 2A is normally the diary entry. We know that 2B is normally our kind of letter or email question, and that's just so that on the exam you're not answering a diary entry and a letter, because stylistically it's very similar and they want to see, can you answer different types of questions. The remaining 4 questions tend to be kind of opinion pieces. Give your opinion on, discuss this problem. So that's what you're working with there. And you must pick, I hate that, so sorry guys. You must pick 2 of those questions, okay? So that is 60 marks, which then altogether is 15%. Okay, so 30 marks for a diary entry, 30 marks for your opinion piece. These ones are 75 words. And you should be spending 20 to 25 minutes max on those. Now, the only thing I would say is, can you get a H1 in 75 words? Yes. Is it easy to do that? Sorry, absolutely not. Okay, so if you're looking for, you're like, I really want to get that H1, H2, even the H3, I would be looking at kind of aiming for 110 words, okay? So for any of these, I know they give the guideline of kind of 75 words and 90 words. I would aim for between 110 and 120, just to give yourself enough space to really make sure that you can include the things that make it look impressive, okay? Now, in terms of the marking scheme for these papers, like obviously working with marking schemes is your best friend for these, because it gives you an insight into what the examiner wants. It's very hard to kind of decide or decipher yourself what the examiner wants from the marking scheme for the oral. So we actually have, myself and Katie, the other French teacher here, have a video. I think it's up on IGTV on the school's Insta. So if you are like, I have no idea what they're looking for, go back, have a look at that. It kind of just breaks down exactly what you need to do for the oral. And then the very last component is the oral, so your listening test. It is worth 80 marks. So for higher, that's 20. And it takes about 40 minutes. Obviously, I can't say you should spend this amount of time or this amount of time, because you just have to be there while it takes place. There's 5 sections. Sections 1 to 4 get played 3 times. Okay, section 5, each question is played twice. So that's just something to bear in mind as you study, that sections 1 to 4, it'll be played the whole way through, then with breaks, then the whole way through. Section 5, it'll play question 1 twice, question 2 twice, question 3 twice, and that is it, okay? And again, with that, the marking scheme is your absolute best friend, because it shows you what the answer is. If you're finding these very, very tough, go online, Google French tape script 2018. I think there's a website that it comes up on. I think it's the first result you see on Google anyway. And you can kind of read along then, and that's really, really helpful for that if you're finding those tough. Perfect. So like I said, just to finish off, we're going to have a look at probable or possible changes to the 2022 paper. Our department have come out and said that just to kind of make your lives easier, because you missed so much fifth year, that we will have adjustments to the paper, and they'll be kind of in line with the first adjustments that were discussed for last year's paper. Now, I suppose the only thing that has been confirmed is the oral, whether they'll just stick to a standard format, stick to the 3 topics that we had last year, or stick to 3 new topics. So we're looking at potentially 3 topics there, TBC. For the written paper, as it stands, you will have 2 comprehensions. They will still be worth 60 marks each, so we're still looking at 120 marks for these. The only thing that will be different is, instead of doing 2 questions from 2, 3 and 4, you'll do 1. So you have to do question 1 still, but it will now be worth 60 marks instead of 40. And then you will pick 1 of the remaining questions. So either a diary entry or an opinion piece or a letter or one of the other opinion pieces. And that will be worth 40 marks instead of 30 each, okay? So the only thing, I suppose the biggest change that we're seeing there is that you do 2 written questions instead of 3. And then for the oral, there's no change, because that's very much sit down, listen to the tape, get it done. Okay, so that is everything that you're going to need to know over the next year. I think what's really important, if you're kind of worrying about how to study, look at where the percentages are, okay? Half of your paper goes for comprehensions, so make sure that you know the vocab that comes up on comprehensions, and that you know what the marking scheme is looking for. 25% is going for your written section, so can I put together an essay? Yeah, but don't spend all of your time worrying about it. I know students that obsess about the essay and spend hours and hours and hours writing opinion pieces. And yes, they benefit from that, but they could potentially benefit more from spending time in other areas. And then finally, your oral worth 25% of the marks, so you should be spending about a quarter of your kind of study time on the oral, okay? So, ça y est, c'est tout. Merci beaucoup, and best of luck with your study this year.